The Wyoming sky hung low and heavy that December morning, a sheet of hammered pewter pressing down on the endless grasslands. Clara Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, watching the first light struggle through the clouds while frost painted delicate patterns across the glass. The wind moaned through the mountain passes, carrying the promise of another harsh winter to the valley below. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned from the window. The stove needed tending, the animals required feeding, and there was no one else to do it. There hadn't been anyone else for 8 months now. Not since Thomas had been crushed beneath that falling pine up at the logging camp. The foreman had brought her the news on a Tuesday afternoon, hat in hand, eyes studying the floorboards as he mumbled about accidents and God's will. Clara pushed the memory aside and focused on the morning tasks. She pulled on Thomas's old work coat, it still smelled faintly of tobacco and sawdust, and stepped out into the biting cold. The barn stood dark against the lightening sky, its weathered boards groaning in the wind. Inside, the horses nickered softly, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Morning, girls," she murmured, running her hand along the neck of the bay mare. "Hungry, I expect." She moved through the familiar routine, hay for the horses, grain for the chickens, breaking the ice on the water troughs. Her hands, once soft from her days as a schoolteacher back east, were now rough and capable. Wyoming had a way of changing a person, stripping away the unnecessary until only the essential remained. By the time she finished the chores, the sun had climbed higher, though it brought little warmth. Clara paused at the barn door, gazing out at the land that stretched endlessly in every direction. 20 acres of good grazing land. Thomas had called it their future, he'd said. Now it was just 20 acres of responsibility that threatened to crush her as surely as that pine had crushed him. The ride to town took an hour on a good day, longer when the roads were muddy or covered in snow. Clara made the trip once a week for supplies, enduring the stares and whispers that followed her like shadows. Willow Creek wasn't unkind, exactly, but it was a town that believed in the natural order of things, and a woman alone, trying to run a ranch, upset that order considerably. Mrs. Henderson was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store when Clara tied her horse to the hitching post. The older woman's eyes flickered with a mixture of pity and disapproval. "Morning, Clara," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Cold one today." "That it is," Clara agreed, keeping her voice equally measured. She'd learned not to give them anything more to talk about than necessary. Inside the store, Mr. Henderson tallied up her purchases: flour, coffee, salt, a precious tin of peaches she couldn't really afford, but bought anyway because they'd been Thomas's favorite. As he wrapped her goods in brown paper, he cleared his throat. "You know, Clara, my nephew back in Cheyenne is looking for a wife. Good man, steady work at the bank. Might be worth considering." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." Clara cut him off politely but firmly. "But I'm managing fine on my own." He shrugged, clearly skeptical. "Winter's just starting. Gets mighty hard out there alone." She didn't argue. There was no point explaining that the loneliness wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was everyone assuming she couldn't handle it. As she loaded her purchases into her saddlebags, she noticed 3 men lounging against the saloon across the street. She recognized them immediately. Jeb Hansen's men. Hansen owned the largest ranch in the valley, and he'd been eyeing Thomas's land for years. He'd made an offer the day after the funeral, standing in her parlor with his hat in his hands and greed in his eyes. One of the men, a wiry fellow with a scar across his jaw, caught her looking and tipped his hat mockingly. Clara turned away, her spine straight, and mounted her horse. She could feel their eyes on her as she rode out of town. The letter was waiting when she got home, tucked into the door frame where anyone passing by could have left it. Clara recognized Hansen's heavy handwriting immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell," it read. "I trust you've had sufficient time to consider my generous offer. The difficulties of managing a ranch alone, especially for a woman, cannot be overstated. I would hate to see you struggle through another winter when a comfortable sum could see you safely settled back east where you belong. My offer stands at $500 for the full parcel, though I cannot guarantee it will remain so generous indefinitely. A woman alone attracts certain unfortunate elements. For your own safety and reputation, I urge you to reconsider. Respectfully, Jeb Hansen. Clara crumpled the letter in her fist. $500 for land worth 3 times that, wrapped in threats dressed as concern. She fed the paper to the stove and watched it burn. That night, she sat by the fire with Thomas's rifle across her lap, cleaning it methodically. He'd taught her to shoot their first winter here, patient despite her initial fumbling. "The West doesn't care if you're a woman," he'd said. "A bullet works the same for everybody." She missed his practical wisdom, his quiet strength. But more than that, she missed having someone who believed she could do more than pour tea and darn socks. Thomas had seen her as a partner, not just a wife. It was why she couldn't give up the ranch. It wasn't just land. It was proof that she was more than what Willow Creek thought a woman should be. The wind picked up as darkness fell, rattling the windows and sending drafts through every crack in the walls. Clara added another log to the fire and checked the rifle one more time. Hansen's unfortunate elements weren't subtle. She'd found fence posts knocked down last week, and yesterday. Fresh horse tracks circled the barn. She thought about writing to her sister in Philadelphia, but what would she say? That she was holding onto a piece of Wyoming dirt out of sheer stubbornness? That she'd rather face whatever Hansen sent her way than admit defeat and crawl back east? Martha wouldn't understand. She'd married a banker and lived in a brick house with gas lamps and a maid. The frontier was just a story in the newspapers to her. Clara banked the fire and prepared for bed. But sleep came fitfully. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, had her reaching for the rifle. This was her life now. Vigilance and isolation, determination and doubt. But it was hers. Thomas had left her more than land. He'd left her the chance to prove that a woman could stand alone in the wilderness and survive. As dawn approached, she rose and began again. The animals needed feeding, the ice needed breaking. And Jeb Hansen needed to understand that Clara Mitchell wasn't going anywhere. The Wyoming winter could throw whatever it wanted at her. She'd survived the worst already. Everything else was just weather. The storm arrived without warning 3 days later. Clara had seen plenty of winter storms in her 2 years on the ranch. But this one felt different. The air turned thick and electric in the early afternoon, and the horses grew restless in their stalls, pawing at the ground and whinnying nervously. By 4 o'clock, the sky had transformed into a wall of churning black clouds advancing from the mountains like an army. Clara hurried to secure everything she could. She herded the chickens into their coop, double-checked the barn doors, and brought in enough firewood to last several days. The first snowflakes began falling as she latched the last shutter, fat and heavy, driven sideways by the rising wind. Within an hour, the world outside had vanished behind a curtain of white. The wind screamed around the corners of the house, finding every gap in the walls, every loose board. Clara built up the fire and lit 2 oil lamps, trying to push back the oppressive darkness that pressed against the windows. She was heating leftover stew when the knock came, 3 solid raps that somehow cut through the howling wind. Clara froze, ladle in hand. No one would be out in this weather unless they were desperate or up to no good. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. "Who's there?" she called, moving toward Thomas's rifle. "Name's Luke Walker, ma'am." The voice was rough, strained. "My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. I saw your light. Please, I just need shelter from the storm." Clara hesitated, a stranger at her door in the middle of a blizzard. It could be one of Hansen's tricks, but leaving someone outside in this weather would be murder. "Are you alone?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Just me and what's left of my pride after walking through this mess." Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling at that. She picked up the rifle and unbolted the door, opening it just enough to see the man outside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, covered in snow from head to foot. Ice crystals clung to his dark beard, and his face was raw from the wind. But it was his eyes that decided her, gray as the winter sky, weary but honest. "Come in," she said, stepping back but keeping the rifle visible. "Quickly, before we lose all the heat." He stumbled inside, bringing a swirl of snow with him. As he stood dripping on her floor, Clara got a better look at him. His coat was well worn but quality. His boots expensive but broken in from long use. A cowboy. Certainly, but not a drifter. His gun belt was peace-bonded, the leather thong tied around the hammer of his Colt, a sign of peaceful intentions. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, teeth chattering. "I thought I was done for out there." "Hang your coat by the fire," Clara instructed, still maintaining her distance. "There's stew on the stove." He moved slowly, stiffly, ice cracking off his clothes with each motion. As he peeled off his coat, she noticed how his hands shook, not from fear, but from cold penetrating to the bone. "How long were you out there?" she asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. Lost track after my horse spooked and ran." He held his hands toward the fire, wincing as feeling returned to his fingers. "Storm came up faster than I expected. I've seen plenty of weather, but this—" He shook his head. Clara studied him while he warmed himself. Mid-30s, she guessed, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years under the open sky. There was something in the way he carried himself, alert even in exhaustion, that suggested a man accustomed to trouble. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am. Passing through from Montana, heading south for the winter." He glanced at her, then at the rifle she still held. "I don't mean you any harm. Soon as this storm breaks, I'll be on my way." "Storm like this could last days," Clara said. "Then I guess I'll owe you for days of kindness." She set the rifle within easy reach and ladled stew into a bowl. He ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite as warmth returned to his body. Clara sat across from him, the table between them like a barrier. "You're alone here," he observed, not quite making it a question. "My husband died 8 months ago." She said simply, "I'm sorry for your loss." She'd heard those words so many times they'd lost meaning, but something in his tone made them feel genuine. "What takes you south?" she asked, deflecting. "Work, mostly. Ranch hand when I can find it. Other things when I can't." He met her eyes. "Legal things. Before you worry." I wasn't worried. "Yes, you were. And you should be. Woman alone. Stranger at the door. You were right to greet me with a rifle." His frankness surprised her. Most men would have been offended or tried to convince her she was being silly. The wind shrieked louder, and something crashed against the side of the house. A tree branch, probably, torn loose by the storm. "That's getting worse," Luke said, glancing toward the windows. Now completely white with driven snow. "The house is solid," Clara said, though she wasn't entirely sure. Thomas had built well, but he'd never faced a storm quite like this. They sat in awkward silence. The only sounds the crackling fire and the relentless wind. Finally, Clara asked, "You have family somewhere?" "Had," he said quietly. "Wife and daughter, up in Montana. Fever took them 3 winters back." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, but Clara recognized it. It was the same tone she used when speaking of Thomas, the attempt to state facts without letting the grief spill out. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "It's why I drift now," he continued. "Can't seem to stay in one place anymore. Too many ghosts." Clara understood that too. Sometimes she saw Thomas in every corner of the house, heard his voice in the creak of the floorboards, but unlike Luke, she couldn't run. This place was all she had left of her husband. A sudden crash made them both jump. One of the shutters had torn loose and was banging against the house. Luke stood immediately. "I'll secure that," he said. "No, it's—" "Ma'am, you gave me shelter. Least I can do is keep that shelter in one piece." Before she could protest further, he was pulling on his still damp coat. Clara grabbed a rope from the pantry. "Tie this around your waist, the other end to the door handle. In this whiteout, you could get lost 10 feet from the house. He looked at her with something like respect. Smart thinking. The moment he opened the door, the storm tried to tear it from its hinges. Snow blasted in horizontally, and the temperature in the room dropped instantly. Luke fought his way out, the rope playing out behind him. Clara held the door, ready to haul him back if needed. It took him several minutes that felt like hours, before he returned. Covered in fresh snow, but triumphant. "Got it secured," he gasped. "But we'd better check the barn. Wind like this could tear the roof clean off." Clara's heart sank. The horses were in that barn. "I'll come with you." "No need. Those are my animals. Mr. Walker, I'll tend to them." They rigged a second rope and fought their way to the barn together. The journey, usually a 30-second walk, took 5 minutes of struggle against the screaming wind. Inside the barn, the horses were wild-eyed with fear, but the structure was holding. They worked together, wordlessly, adding extra braces where boards groaned, soothing the terrified animals, making sure food and water were accessible. When they finally made it back to the house, both were exhausted. Clara's hands were numb despite her gloves, and Luke's face was dangerously pale. They collapsed in front of the fire, too tired for propriety. "Thank you," Clara said when she could speak again. "I couldn't have managed that alone." "You would have tried, though," Luke said, and there was admiration in his voice. "Not many women would venture into a storm like that for livestock. Not many women have to." Clara replied sharply, then softer. "Those horses are all I have to run this place. Without them, I might as well sign Hanson's papers." "Hanson?" Luke's eyes sharpened. Clara cursed herself for letting that slip. "Local rancher. He wants to buy me out." "And you don't want to sell?" "No." Luke nodded slowly. "I've known men like that. They don't usually take no for an answer." The wind chose that moment to intensify, if such a thing were possible. The whole house shuddered, and somewhere upstairs, something broke with a crash. They looked at each other, and Clara saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. This wasn't just a storm anymore. This was nature trying to erase them from the landscape. "We should prepare for a long siege," Luke said quietly. "This isn't ending anytime soon." The storm raged for 3 days. By the second morning, they had fallen into an unexpected rhythm of survival. Luke proved himself invaluable, anticipating problems before they arose. When the kitchen window cracked from the cold, he patched it with boards and cloth before it could shatter. When snow began drifting against the doors, threatening to trap them inside, he cleared it every few hours without being asked. Clara found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. His hands, scarred but gentle when calming the horses. The way he moved through her house respectfully, never presuming. Always asking before touching Thomas's tools. Most men would have taken charge by now. Started giving orders. Luke simply worked alongside her as if they'd been partners for years. "Tell me about Montana," she said on the second evening, as they shared a meager supper of beans and cornbread. The storm had made cooking difficult, the wind threatening to blow smoke back down the chimney. Luke was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. Beautiful country, mountains that touch the sky, valleys so green it hurts your eyes. My Mary loved it there, said it was God's country. His voice caught slightly on his wife's name. "How old was your daughter?" 6, Sarah, had her mother's smile and my stubborn streak. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She could ride before she could properly walk. Fearless little thing. Clara felt her throat tighten. She and Thomas had wanted children, had tried for the 2 years of their marriage. Another dream the frontier had stolen. The fever came through in February. Luke continued. "Half the valley got sick. I was out checking cattle, got caught in a blizzard. By the time I made it back," he shrugged, the gesture holding volumes of pain. "Doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done, but knowing that doesn't help much at 3 in the morning." "No," Clara agreed softly. "It doesn't." They sat in companionable silence. Two people who understood that grief was a country with its own language. The wind howled outside, but inside, The fire created a small circle of warmth and something that might have been peace. On the third morning, Clara woke to find Luke already up, peering out the window. The wind had finally begun to die down, though snow still fell steadily. "I think it's breaking," he said. "We should check the animals." They bundled up and ventured out together. The world had been transformed into an alien landscape of white drifts and sculpted snow. The barn had survived, though barely. One corner of the roof had partially lifted, and snow had blown in through the gap. "This needs fixing before the next storm," Luke said, assessing the damage. "You have lumber?" "Some. Thomas was planning to build a new chicken coop come spring." They spent the morning making emergency repairs, Luke showing Clara techniques she hadn't known. He was patient when teaching, never condescending, and she found herself enjoying the work despite the bitter cold. As they returned to the house for lunch, Clara spotted riders in the distance, 3 dark shapes against the white landscape, heading toward town, even from far away. She recognized the lead rider's posture. "Jeb Hansen." Luke followed her gaze. "Friends of yours?" "Hardly." She explained about Hansen, the pressure to sell, the veiled threats. Luke's expression darkened with each word. "Men like that count on fear," he said, "especially a woman's fear." "I'm not afraid of Jeb Hansen," Clara said firmly. "I know. That's probably what worries him most." That afternoon, as they worked to clear snow from around the house, Clara caught Luke watching the horizon repeatedly. "You think they'll come here? Storm like this, people check on neighbors. It would look strange if they didn't." He paused. "When they do, it might be better if they don't find me here." Clara felt an unexpected flutter of panic. "The storm's not fully passed. You can't leave yet." I meant I could stay in the barn. Less complicated for you." She understood his thinking. A widow with a strange man in her house? The gossip would be fierce, but something rebellious rose in her. "No, you've earned your place by this fire. I won't have you freezing in the barn for the sake of waggling tongues." He smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, revealing the younger man beneath the weather-beaten exterior. "You're a remarkable woman, Clara Mitchell." Her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. She turned away, confused by her reaction. "I'm a practical woman, nothing more." The riders came at sunset, just as Luke had predicted. Clara recognized 2 of Hansen's men and the sheriff, Jim Bradley. She met them on the porch, Luke standing silently behind her in the doorway. "Mrs. Mitchell." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Just checking on folks after the storm. That was a bad one." "We managed fine, Sheriff. Thank you for your concern." His eyes moved past her to Luke. "Don't believe we've met, stranger." "Luke Walker," Luke said easily. "Got caught in the storm. Mrs. Mitchell was kind enough to offer shelter." "That's so." One of Hansen's men, a rat-faced fellow named Pete Curry, smirked. Right neighborly of her. Clara felt Luke tense behind her, but his voice remained calm. "It was that or freeze to death. I'd say Christian charity is still alive in Wyoming." The sheriff studied them both. Jim Bradley was a fair man, but he walked a careful line between the law and the powerful ranchers who essentially paid his salary. "You planning on moving along soon, Mr. Walker?" "Soon as I can find my horse and the roads are clear, Sheriff." "See that you do, Mrs. Mitchell. You need anything, you send word." After they left, Clara found herself shaking, not from fear, but from anger. "Christian charity," she muttered, "as if I need their permission to save a man from freezing." You don't," Luke said quietly. "But they needed to size up the situation, determine if I'm a threat to their plans." "Are you?" He met her eyes directly. "I wasn't planning to be, but plans can change." That evening, as they prepared supper together, Clara was acutely aware of how natural it felt. Luke knew his way around her kitchen now, knew where she kept the salt, how she liked the fire banked. It was dangerously comfortable. this temporary domesticity. "I'll help you find your horse tomorrow," she offered. "Old Ben Harris down the valley usually takes in strays. We can check there first." Luke nodded, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't eager to find the animal. "I appreciate that." They were washing dishes, she washing, he drying, when their hands accidentally touched over a plate. Both froze. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the dim lamplight. "Clara," Luke began, then stopped. "I should tell you something. About why I was really heading south." Her heart sank. Here it came, the confession that would shatter this fragile peace. "You don't owe me explanations. I think I do." He set down the dish towel, running a hand through his hair. "There was trouble in Montana. Not law trouble, but I killed a man named Briggs, who was beating his wife. I intervened. He drew on me. It was self-defense, but he had brothers, 3 of them. They made it clear I wasn't welcome in Montana anymore." Clara absorbed this information. "The woman, was she all right?" Luke looked surprised by the question. "She was. Last I heard, she'd taken her children and gone to live with her sister in California. Then you did the right thing. Not everyone sees it that way. The Briggs brothers have friends, long memories too." Clara understood what he wasn't saying. He was a marked man, carrying trouble with him like a shadow. She should be frightened, should ask him to leave immediately. Instead, she found herself saying, "Thomas always said the right thing isn't always the safe thing. Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Clara smiled sadly. "He would have liked you. I think you're both the kind who can't walk away from someone in trouble." The weight of that statement hung between them, because they both knew she was someone in trouble. And Luke Walker was exactly the kind of man who wouldn't walk away. The question was whether she'd let him stay long enough to help. Outside, the wind had finally died to a whisper. The storm was passing, but Clara had a feeling the real tempest was just beginning. She caught Luke's eyes across the kitchen, saw her own awareness reflected there. Something had shifted between them during these 3 snowbound days. Something that had nothing to do with storms or shelter, and everything to do with 2 lonely people recognizing a kindred spirit. Tomorrow, he'd look for his horse. Tomorrow, decisions would have to be made. But tonight, with the fire crackling and the dishes done, they sat together in comfortable silence, neither ready to break whatever spell the storm had woven around them. The morning after the storm broke dawned crystal clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a field of diamonds. Luke found his horse at Ben Harris's ranch, just as Clara had predicted. The old man had taken in 3 strays during the storm, and Luke's gray gelding was contentedly munching hay in the barn. "Fine animal," Ben commented, running a gnarled hand along the horse's flank. "Well trained, too. Didn't give me a lick of trouble." As they rode back to Clara's ranch, Luke was unusually quiet. Clara sensed the weight of unspoken words between them. The ease they'd found during the storm seemed fragile in the bright daylight, like something that might shatter if examined too closely. They were unsaddling the horses when the thunder of hoofbeats announced visitors. Jeb Hansen himself rode up with 5 men, their faces hard as winter granite. Clara felt Luke tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before stopping. "Mrs. Mitchell." Hansen touched his hat brim in a mockery of politeness. He was a big man, gone to fat around the middle but still powerful, with cold blue eyes that missed nothing. "Glad to see you weathered the storm. As you can see, Mr. Hansen, I'm managing fine." His gaze slid to Luke. "And with help. I see. Don't believe I've had the pleasure. Mr. Walker," Luke said shortly. "Ah, yes, the drifter who needed shelter. Storm's passed. I notice. Yet here you are." "Man's got a right to rest his horse before moving on," Luke replied evenly. Hansen smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Indeed, though some might say a man who overstays his welcome is taking advantage of a widow's kindness. Clara stepped forward. "Mr. Walker has been helping with storm repairs, unless you're here to offer assistance yourself. I'll thank you not to question my judgment about my own property." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hansen's men shifted in their saddles, hands resting on weapons. Pete Curry spat tobacco juice into the snow, the brown stains spreading like blood. "Your property," Hansen repeated softly. "Yes, about that. I've been more than patient, Mrs. Mitchell. But patience has limits. This ranch is too much for a woman alone. What happens when the next storm hits, or when the spring floods come? You'll be begging for help then. Then I'll handle it, just as I've handled everything else." Hansen leaned forward in his saddle. "You're being foolish. $500 would set you up nice back east. Find yourself a new husband. Have a proper life instead of playing at being a rancher." "Playing?" Clara's voice went dangerously quiet. "I've worked this land for 2 years. Birthed calves, mended fences, brought in harvest. That's not playing. Mr. Hansen, that's ranching. That's a man's work," Curry interjected. "Ain't natural. A woman doing such things." Luke spoke up then, his voice deceptively mild. "Seems to me Mrs. Mitchell is doing fine. Can't say I see anything unnatural about hard work and determination." Hansen's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, drifter? Maybe not, but I've got eyes. I can see a woman managing her land better than some men I've known. I can also see buzzards circling, waiting for something to die." Luke met Hansen's stare directly. "Question is, are you willing to wait for nature to take its course? Or are you the type to hurry things along?" The threat hung in the air like ice crystals. Hansen's face flushed dark red. "You dare imply—" "I'm not implying anything." Luke cut him off. "Just observing. Man in your position, respectable rancher, pillar of the community, you'd never stoop to pressuring a widow." "Would you?" For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Clara held her breath, acutely aware that they were outnumbered 6-2. Then Hansen pulled back, his politician smile returning. "Of course not. I'm simply offering a business proposition. But I can see Mrs. Mitchell has found herself a protector. Tell me, Walker, what's your interest here? Looking to marry into property yourself?" The insult was calculated, designed to provoke, but Luke merely smiled. "My interest is seeing fair dealings. Nothing more, nothing less." "Fair." Hansen tasted the word like something bitter. "Well then, Mrs. Mitchell, my offer stands, but it won't forever. Winter's long in Wyoming. Accidents happen. Stock dies. Barns burn." His gaze lingered on the recently repaired section of barn roof. "Would be a shame if all your hard work came to nothing." "Is that a threat, Mr. Hansen?" Clara asked steadily. "Merely an observation about the hazards of ranch life. Good day, Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Walker." He wheeled his horse around. His men, following like a pack of wolves, denied their prey. After they'd gone, Clara found herself trembling, not from fear, but from rage. "Barns burn," she repeated bitterly. Could he be any clearer? "Clear enough," Luke agreed grimly. "This is escalating faster than I expected." She turned to him. "You don't have to involve yourself in this. It's my fight." "Is it?" He met her gaze. "You gave me shelter when I needed it. In my book, that makes your troubles my troubles. For how long? Until you find work? Until the Briggs brothers track you down? You're a drifter. Luke, you said so yourself. This isn't your fight to stay for." The words came out harsher than she intended, born of fear, not of Hansen, but of how much she wanted Luke to stay. She saw the flash of hurt in his eyes before he shuttered his expression. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should move on. Tomorrow. Maybe." "Luke, I didn't mean—" "No, you spoke truth. I am a drifter. Have been since Mary and Sarah died. Easier that way. No connections, no obligations." He started toward the barn. "I'll bed down out here tonight. Be gone at first light." Clara watched him go, wanting to call him back but not knowing what to say. She'd pushed him away before she could come to depend on him. It was the smart thing to do. So why did it feel like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life? That night, she lay awake listening to the house settle around her. Without Luke's presence, the rooms felt colder, emptier. She thought about him in the barn, probably wrapped in a horse blanket, too proud to come back inside. She thought about Hanson's threats, about facing whatever came next alone. At midnight, she gave up on sleep. She pulled on Thomas's coat and boots and made her way to the barn. Luke was sitting on a hay bale, fully dressed, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. Hard to sleep when you're thinking. "What are you thinking about?" "How a man knows when it's time to stop running." He set the gun aside. "I've been drifting for 3 years. Clara, 3 years of not caring about anything beyond the next meal, the next job. Then I knock on your door, and suddenly—" He shook his head. "Suddenly what?" she prompted softly. "Suddenly I remember what it's like to care about something. Someone." He stood, moving closer. "You were right. I am a drifter, but maybe I'm tired of drifting." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. "Hanson won't back down. It'll get worse before it gets better. I know. The Briggs brothers could come looking. They could. I can't pay you much. Barely enough to keep food on the table. I'm not looking for pay." "Then what are you looking for?" He was close enough now that she could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines carved by sun and sorrow around his eyes. "A reason to stay still. A place that feels like it could be home again. Someone who looks at me and sees more than a hired gun or a saddle tramp." "I see you," Clara whispered. "I know," he said simply. "That's why I can't leave." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Clara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "We should be careful. People will talk. Let them talk. We know the truth." "And what's the truth?" Luke's smile was sad and sweet. "That 2 broken people might just make one whole one, given time and trust." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not ready. I'm not asking you to be. I'm just asking for the chance to earn my place here, to help you fight for what's yours, to see if maybe, someday." He didn't finish, but she understood. "All right," she said finally. "You can stay. We'll face Hanson together." "Together," Luke agreed, and the word felt like a promise. As they walked back to the house, side by side in the moonlight, neither saw the rider on the distant ridge, watching. By morning, Jeb Hanson would know that the drifter was staying, and plans would be made accordingly. But for now, in the quiet of the winter night, Clara allowed herself to hope. Luke Walker might have arrived as a stranger seeking shelter from a storm, but he was becoming something more. Not a replacement for Thomas. No one could be that. But perhaps, in time, something new. Something worth fighting for. The house welcomed them back with warmth and light. And for the first time in 8 months, Clara didn't feel alone. The smell of smoke woke Clara from a dead sleep. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, the acrid scent mixing with some half-remembered nightmare. Then Luke's voice cut through the darkness, urgent and commanding. "Clara! Fire! The barn's on fire!" She threw off her blankets and rushed to the window. Orange flames danced against the night sky, already consuming the far corner of the barn where they stored the winter hay. Her horse's terrified whinnies pierced the air. Luke was already dressed and heading for the door. "I'll get the animals out. You get water—" "The horses first," Clara interrupted, pulling on her boots with shaking hands. "Nothing else matters if we lose them." They ran together into the nightmare of smoke and flame. The fire had started in the hay storage but was spreading fast, feeding on the dry wood and straw. The horses were panicking, rearing and kicking at their stall doors. "Take the mare!" Luke shouted over the roar of flames. "I'll get the others." Clara grabbed a blanket, threw it over the bay mare's head, and led her out into the safety of the yard. The horse fought her every step, but Clara held firm, using every ounce of strength she possessed. Behind her, she could hear Luke working to free the other 2 horses, his voice calm despite the chaos. By the time they got all 3 animals safely to the corral, the barn was fully engulfed. They could only stand and watch as months of hay, Thomas's tools, and half their winter supplies went up in smoke. The fire lit up the landscape for miles, turning night into hellish day. There, Luke pointed to movement near the tree line. Riders. Clara saw them too. 3 men on horseback, watching the destruction. They were too far away to identify in the darkness, but she didn't need to see their faces. The message was clear. The fire burned until dawn, leaving only charred timbers and ash. Neighbors began arriving as the sun rose. Word traveled fast in the valley. Ben Harris brought his sons. The Millers came with their wagon, even Mrs. Henderson from town appeared with a basket of food and words of sympathy. Sheriff Bradley arrived around mid-morning, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. Any idea how it started? Mrs. Mitchell? I have ideas, Clara said flatly. We saw riders watching while it burned. Saw riders, the sheriff repeated carefully. Can you identify them? It was dark. Then you didn't see anything useful. Bradley cut her off, but his eyes held a warning, not dismissal. He lowered his voice. Clara, I know what you're thinking, but without proof. Without proof, Jeb Hansen gets away with it, Luke said coldly. Bradley turned to him. That's a serious accusation. Mr. Walker, man like Hansen has a lot of friends. You start throwing his name around without evidence? He let the threat hang. So we're supposed to just accept it? Clara demanded. Let him burn us out piece by piece. I'm saying be smart. Bradley replied. Hansen was at the Cattlemen's Association meeting in town last night. Dozen witnesses will swear to it. His men were probably with him. Probably. Luke repeated with bitter emphasis. The sheriff sighed. I'll ask around. See if anyone saw anything. But Clara, you need to think about your safety. This is escalating. After Bradley left, the neighbors pitched in to help with cleanup. The women gathered around Clara, offering condolences and supplies, while the men worked with Luke to clear the debris and salvage what little remained. Such a tragedy. Mrs. Miller murmured, pressing a jar of preserves into Clara's hands. First your husband, now this. Perhaps it's a sign. A sign of what? Clara asked sharply. Well, that maybe this life is too hard for a woman alone. No shame in admitting that. Clara felt her temper flare. The only thing this is a sign of is that some men can't stand a woman succeeding on her own. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. Clara, dear, we're only thinking of your welfare. And with this gentleman staying here, she glanced meaningfully at Luke. Mr. Walker has been nothing but helpful and proper, Clara said firmly, which is more than I can say for some in this valley. The women exchanged glances, and Clara knew she'd just become the subject of even more gossip. But she was past caring what they thought. Let them whisper. She had bigger problems. By afternoon, the neighbors had departed, leaving Clara and Luke alone with the devastation. They sat on the porch steps, exhausted and covered in soot, watching the horses graze in the corral, the only wealth they'd managed to save. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. This happened because of me. Because I won't sell. This happened because Hansen's a coward who burns barns in the night, Luke corrected. None of this is your fault. I should have been more careful. Should have posted a watch. Stop. Luke turned to face her. You want to blame yourself. Go ahead, but I was here too. I should have expected something like this. His jaw tightened. I've dealt with men like Hansen before. They escalate until someone stops them. And how do we stop him? The sheriff won't help. The town thinks I should give up. I've got no hay for winter. Half my tools are gone. But you've got your horses, you've got your land, and you've got me. Luke's eyes were fierce. That's enough to start with. Clara felt tears threaten. She'd held them back all day, refusing to show weakness in front of the neighbors. But now, with just Luke beside her, the weight of it all crashed down. Thomas built that barn, she whispered. We raised it the first summer. Half the valley came to help. It was the last piece of him I had. Luke didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, he simply moved closer, his solid presence more comforting than words. They sat in silence as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. We'll rebuild, he said finally. Different barn, but just as strong, maybe stronger. With what? I've barely got money for food, let alone lumber. There are ways. I've got some money saved, and… No. Clara shook her head firmly. I won't take your money. Then consider it an investment. I plan to be around a while. Might as well invest in where I'm staying. She looked at him, seeing the determination in his weathered face. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much? You could ride out tomorrow. Find work on a spread that isn't being terrorized by land grabbers. Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. After Mary and Sarah died, I thought I'd never care about anything again. Easier that way. No pain if you don't let anything matter. He picked up a piece of charred wood, turning it over in his hands. But then I knocked on your door, and you let me in. Not just into your house, into your fight. Made me remember what it was like to have something worth protecting. Clara's heart constricted. Luke, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quickly. But I'm not leaving. Not unless you tell me to go. Hansen thinks he can break you because you're alone. But you're not alone anymore. The words hung between them. A promise and a declaration. Clara found herself leaning into his shoulder, drawing strength from his conviction. All right, she said softly. We rebuild, together. As if in response to her words. Hoofbeats sounded from the road. They both tensed, but it was only a single rider, young Tommy Harris, Ben's son. Pa sent me, the boy called out, dismounting with teenage awkwardness. Said to tell you he's organizing a barn raising, week from Saturday. Also said anyone who doesn't show up to help ain't welcome at his place come harvest time. Clara blinked in surprise. Ben Harris was a powerful voice in the valley, second only to Hansen. His support meant something. Also, Tommy continued, digging in his saddlebag. Ma sent these. He produced a cloth bag of nails. Said you'd be needing them. And Mr. Peterson at the mill says he's got some lumber that's been sitting too long. Needs to get rid of it cheap. After the boy left, Clara turned to Luke with wonder. They're going to help? Not everyone in this valley is under Hansen's thumb, Luke observed. Burning that barn might have been his biggest mistake. Nothing brings people together like a bully showing his true colors. That night, as Clara prepared a simple supper from what supplies they had left, she felt a shift in the air. The fire had been meant to break her, to send her running back east. Instead, it had revealed two things. She had more friends than she'd known, and she was stronger than even she had believed. The barn was gone, but she remained. And now she had Luke beside her, steady as a mountain, fierce as a storm. Hansen had escalated the conflict, but he'd also unified the opposition. The war for Clara's land was far from over, but for the first time since Thomas's death, she believed she might actually win it. The barn raising had drawn most of the valley, leaving Clara's ranch unusually busy with life and laughter. For one day, it had felt like the old times, before Thomas died, before Hansen's threats. But that sense of community was shattered 3 days later when Hansen made his final play. Clara was checking the fence line when she heard the thunder of approaching horses, too many to be friendly visitors. She turned to see Hansen leading 8 men, all armed, their faces set with grim purpose. Luke emerged from the new barn, his hand resting on his gun but not drawing. Mrs. Mitchell, Hansen called out, not bothering to dismount. I've come with a final offer. Sign the deed over now, take the $500, and leave peacefully. Otherwise, I'll take possession through other means. What other means? Clara demanded, though her heart was already racing with dread. Hansen produced a paper from his coat. A lien on your property. Seems your late husband borrowed money from me last year. $300. Due in full. You can't pay, so I'm foreclosing. That's a lie. Clara stepped forward, fury overcoming fear. Thomas never borrowed from you. He'd have told me. I have his signature right here. Sheriff Bradley has already verified it. Luke spoke up, his voice dangerously calm. Let me see that paper. Hansen smirked. The drifter wants to play lawyer? This is legal business. Walker, no concern of yours. Everything about Mrs. Mitchell is my concern, Luke replied. Show me the paper, or admit it's forged. The accusation hung in the cold air. Hansen's men shifted restlessly, hands moving to weapons. Pete Curry spat tobacco juice and growled. Boss don't need to prove nothing to saddle tramps. No. Luke stepped off the porch, moving with the controlled grace of a man who'd faced down armed men before. Then why bring 8 men for a legal transaction? Why come armed to serve a lien? Because we know what kind of man you are. Walker. Hansen snarled. Yeah, I did some checking. Killed a man in Montana. Run out of town. Now you're sniffing around another man's widow, looking to take what ain't yours. Like you're trying to take what isn't yours, Luke countered. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara counted heartbeats, knowing violence balanced on a knife's edge. Then another voice cut through the tension. Nobody's taking anything today. Ben Harris rode into view, accompanied by 6 other ranchers, all armed. The Millers, the Petersons, even old Sam Crawford, who rarely left his place. They arranged themselves beside Clara and Luke, a clear statement of support. Ben, Hansen's voice held warning. This isn't your affair. When a neighbor's threatened, it's all our affair. Harris replied, Show us this supposed debt paper. Jeb, let's all have a look at Thomas Mitchell's signature. Hansen's face darkened. I don't need to justify legal documents to a bunch of... A shot cracked across the frozen air. Everyone went for their guns. But it was Luke who'd fired. His bullet striking the ground inches from Hansen's horse. The animal danced sideways, nearly unseating its rider. Next one won't be a warning, Luke said quietly. You've got no legal claim here. That paper's as fake as your concern for Mrs. Mitchell's welfare. Now you can ride out, or we can settle this permanent-like. Are you threatening me, Walker? Stating facts. You brought 8 men to steal a widow's land. We're here to stop you. How this ends is your choice. Hansen looked around, calculating odds. 16 men faced each other across Clara's yard, the December air sharp with the promise of bloodshed. Clara held her breath, knowing that if shooting started, people would die. Good people, defending her. Then Sheriff Bradley appeared, riding hard from town with 2 deputies. Stand down, all of you, he shouted. Nobody's shooting anybody on my watch. Sheriff, Hansen began. I'm here to... I know why you're here. Jeb. Bradley positioned himself between the 2 groups. And I've got news for you. Judge Martinez rode in from Cheyenne this morning. He wants to see that debt paper you claim to have. Seems someone sent him a telegram about possible fraud. Clara glanced at Luke, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. He'd found a way to contact the circuit judge. This is ridiculous, Hansen blustered. My business dealings are now under judicial review. Bradley finished. Judge's orders. Until he reviews all documents. No property transfers. That includes foreclosures. He looked directly at Hansen. I suggest you and your men head back to your spread. Now. For a moment, Hansen's mask slipped, revealing the cruel fury beneath. His hand twitched toward his gun, and Clara saw Luke tense, ready. Then Hansen regained control, pulling his horse around savagely. This isn't over, he snarled. You can't protect her forever. Walker, and you... He pointed at the other ranchers. You'll regret choosing the wrong side. They watched him ride away, his men trailing like beaten dogs. Only when they were out of sight did Clara realize she'd been holding her breath. Her knees suddenly felt weak. You all right? Luke was beside her instantly, his hand on her elbow, steady and warm. I'm fine, just... She looked around at her neighbors, tears pricking her eyes. Thank you, all of you. Ben Harris dismounted, his weathered face kind. Thomas was a good man. He'd have done the same for any of us. Besides, he grinned. About time someone stood up to Jeb Hansen. As the group dispersed, Sheriff Bradley lingered. That was a near thing, he said quietly to Luke. If shooting had started. But it didn't, Luke replied. And now there's a judge involved. You did that? Contacted Martinez? Sent a telegram from town yesterday. Figured legal problems need legal solutions. Bradley studied him. You're not just some drifting cowhand, are you? Luke shrugged. I've been a lot of things. Sheriff, right now, I'm just a man trying to help a neighbor. After everyone left, Clara and Luke stood alone in the yard where violence had nearly erupted. The sun was setting, painting the mountains crimson and gold. You contacted the judge. Clara said. It wasn't a question. Seemed like the smart play. Hanson's depending on his money and influence, but judges, real judges, care about law, and forged documents are serious crimes. How did you know it was forged? Luke's smile was grim. Because I knew Thomas Mitchell for all of 3 minutes while dying in a storm, and even I could tell he was too proud to borrow money, especially from a snake like Hanson. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude. Luke, what you did today was necessary. He finished. But it's not over. Hanson won't give up easy. He'll wait for the judge to leave, for people to forget, for another opportunity. Then what do we do? Luke turned to her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. We stay ready. We keep our allies close, and we don't give him another chance to strike. They stood close in the gathering darkness, and Clara was acutely aware of his presence, solid and reassuring beside her. The crisis had passed, but the danger remained, lurking like a wolf at the edge of firelight. I should check the horses, Luke said. But he didn't move. Yes, Clara agreed, not moving either. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then a coyote howled in the distance, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. I'll take first watch tonight, Luke said, just in case Hanson decides to try something in the dark. Clara nodded, understanding that their world had shifted again. They were no longer just fighting for land, they were fighting for their lives. But as she watched Luke head toward the barn, rifle in hand, she felt oddly at peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Inside the house, she paused at Thomas's photograph on the mantel. I hope you'd understand, she whispered. I hope you'd approve. The photograph, of course, gave no answer. But outside, she heard Luke's steady footsteps as he patrolled, keeping watch through the night. And somehow, that felt like answer enough. The storm that came that night was different from the one that had brought Luke to Clara's door. This one rolled in fast and violent, as if the very sky sought to mirror the human tempest below. Lightning split the darkness while thunder shook the walls, and in between the crashes, Clara heard what she'd been dreading. Horses, riding hard toward the ranch. Luke! She grabbed Thomas's rifle and rushed to the window. He was already moving, having heard them too. How many? Can't tell. 6, maybe 7. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the riders spreading out to surround the house. It's Hanson. Get to the root cellar, Luke commanded, checking his revolver. Bar the door and don't come out until... No. Clara's voice was steel. This is my land, my fight. Before he could argue, the front door exploded inward. Pete Curry stood there, rain streaming off his slicker, gun drawn. Evening, folks. Boss wants a word. Luke's hand blurred toward his weapon, but stopped as more men appeared at the windows, rifles trained on them. They were surrounded. Jeb Hanson entered like he owned the place, water pooling beneath his boots on Clara's clean floor. His eyes were wild, desperate, the look of a man whose carefully laid plans had crumbled. Judge Martinez ruled against me, he snarled. Said the debt paper had irregularities. You did that, Walker. You turned him against me. The forged signature turned him against you, Luke replied calmly, though Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he positioned himself slightly in front of her. Doesn't matter now? Hanson smiled, ugly and triumphant. Judge is headed back to Cheyenne. Storm washed out the bridge at Miller's Creek. Could be weeks before anyone knows what happened here. You're talking about murder, Clara said, her voice steadier than her hands. I'm talking about justice. You took what should have been mine. This land, the water rights, I offered fair price. But you had to be stubborn. Had to play the grieving widow, thinking you could run a ranch like a man. She runs it better than you ever could, Luke said quietly. Hanson's face purpled. Enough. Here's what happens now. You sign the deed. Both of you witness it. Then you disappear. Tonight, storm like this. Folks go missing, especially folks who aren't from around here. His gaze lingered on Luke. Nobody will question it. And if we refuse? Clara asked, though she already knew. Curry laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Then we skipped to the disappearing part. Lightning illuminated the room in stark relief. 7 armed men against 2. Clara's mind raced. The neighbors who'd stood with them earlier were miles away, probably battened down against the storm. No help would come. I'll sign, she said suddenly. Clara, no, Luke started. It's just land. She continued, moving toward the desk where she kept the deed. Not worth dying for. She felt Luke's eyes on her, saw Hanson's satisfied smirk. Her hands shook as she opened the drawer, reaching for the papers. Then her fingers closed on something else. The small Derringer Thomas had given her their first Christmas, insisting she keep it close. Time slowed. She turned, the tiny gun bucking in her hand. Her shot took Curry in the shoulder, spinning him around. Luke moved like lightning, drawing and firing in one motion. His bullet caught the man at the window before he could react. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded in the confined space. Clara dove behind the overturned desk as splinters flew. Luke had somehow gotten to cover behind the heavy oak cabinet, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The storm added its voice to the battle, thunder masking gunshots, lightning providing staccato illumination. "The lamp!" Luke shouted. Clara understood immediately. She grabbed the oil lamp from the side table and hurled it at Hanson. It shattered against his chest, oil spreading across his coat. He cursed and stumbled backward, frantically batting at the liquid. In the confusion, Clara made it to Luke's side. He pressed his spare gun into her hand. "Back door, on 3. But before they could move, new gunfire erupted from outside. Hanson's men at the windows cried out, turning to face this new threat. Through the storm-lashed night came a familiar voice. "Clara, Luke, we're here." Ben Harris, God bless him, leading what sounded like half the valley. The tide turned in an instant, caught between defenders inside and attackers outside. Hanson's men began throwing down weapons. "No!" Hanson raged, his oil-soaked coat glistening. "This is mine! It should all be mine!" He raised his gun toward Clara, his face twisted with fury and madness. Luke moved to shield her, but he was too far away. The gun centered on her chest, Hanson's finger tightening on the trigger. Then another shot rang out. Hanson staggered, looking down in shock at the spreading red stain on his shirt. Behind him, Sheriff Bradley stood in the doorway, smoking rifle in hand. "That's enough, Jeb," the sheriff said quietly. Hanson fell to his knees, then forward. The gun slipped from nerveless fingers. In death. His face held only surprise, as if he couldn't believe his reign had ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Clara heard Luke's voice, urgent and worried. "Are you hurt? Clara, are you—" "I'm fine," she managed, though her legs gave out. He caught her, held her steady. "How did they know to come?" Ben Harris entered, water streaming from his hat. "Luke sent word. Said if anything happened tonight, we should come running. Good thing, too. That storm nearly kept us away." Sheriff Bradley was checking Hanson's body, his face grim. "Self-defense, clear as day. All these witnesses will testify to that." He looked at the surviving gang members. "As for you boys, I'm thinking attempted murder, breaking and entering, conspiracy. The judge will sort it out." As the sheriff and neighbors dealt with the aftermath, Clara found herself on the porch with Luke, watching the storm begin to break. The rain was gentler now, washing away the violence of the night. "You sent word to Ben," she said. It wasn't a question. Had a feeling Hanson would try something when he heard about the judge. Man like that, when cornered. Luke shrugged. I've seen it before. You saved my life. We saved each other's. He turned to her, his eyes serious. Clara, what you did in there was necessary, she finished, echoing his words from days before. They stood close, the night's terror still thrumming through their veins. Clara realized she was still gripping his hand, couldn't seem to let go. It's over, Luke said softly. Hanson's gone. The ranch is safe. Thanks to you. Thanks to us. To the whole valley standing together. He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. Clara, I need to tell you something. With Hanson gone, with the threat ended, I don't have a reason to stay anymore. Unless... Her heart hammered against her ribs. Unless you want me to, not as a hired hand or protector, but as... He stopped, frustrated. I'm no good with words. Never have been, but these weeks with you, fighting beside you, seeing your strength and courage. Clara stopped him with a gentle touch to his lips. Luke Walker, are you trying to court me? A smile broke across his weather-beaten face, transforming it. I suppose I am, if you'll have a broken-down drifter with more past than future. I'll have you, she whispered. On one condition. Name it. No more drifting. This is home now. Our home. Our home, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Then he kissed her, there on the porch with the storm fading and the future spreading before them like sunrise after darkness. Later, Sheriff Bradley would write his report. The circuit judge would rule on the surviving gang members. The valley would slowly return to normal, though with a new understanding of what neighbors meant to each other. But for now, Clara stood in Luke's arms, feeling the solid warmth of him, the promise of tomorrows they'd build together. The ranch was safe. More than that, it was no longer just her solitary burden. It was their shared dream. Inside the house, Thomas's photograph watched from the mantel, and perhaps it was just the flickering lamplight, but Clara could have sworn he was smiling. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, as if nature itself celebrated the end of violence. The snow melted from the mountains in rushing streams. The grasslands turned emerald green, and wildflowers painted the meadows in blues and yellows. Clara stood on her porch, watching Luke work with a young colt in the corral, his movements patient and sure. 3 months had passed since that terrible night. The trial had been swift. Hanson's surviving men testified against each other in hopes of leniency, painting a clear picture of years of intimidation and land grabbing. The judge had been thorough, and justice, for once, had prevailed. You're wool gathering again, Luke called out, leading the colt toward the fence where she stood. Just thinking, Clara replied, running her hand along the colt's soft nose, about how different everything is. Good different. The best different. They'd been married 2 weeks after the trial, a simple ceremony in the town church with half the valley in attendance, Mrs. Henderson had even cried, declaring she'd always known Clara would find happiness again. Clara had bitten her tongue rather than remind the woman of her earlier disapproval. The ranch was thriving now. With Hanson's reign of fear ended, the smaller ranchers had begun working together, sharing resources and knowledge. Luke's experience with horses had proven invaluable. He had a gift for training that drew buyers from as far as Denver. Letter came while you were in town, Luke said, producing an envelope from his pocket. From Montana. Clara's heart skipped. They'd been waiting for this news. Luke had written to the authorities there, explaining the situation with the Briggs brothers, with Hanson's death making headlines even in neighboring states. Luke's actions 3 years ago were being viewed in a new light. He opened it slowly, read silently, then looked up with wonder. The Briggs brothers were arrested last month for cattle rustling. They're facing 20 years. The marshal says I'm no longer wanted for questioning, says the woman I helped, Mrs. Briggs, testified about what really happened that night. You're free, Clara breathed. Truly free. Free to stay right here, Luke agreed, pulling her close. Never had much use for freedom until I had somewhere I wanted to be. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Clara tensed. Old habits died hard, but Luke just smiled. That'll be Ben and the others. Poker night. Remember? It had become a tradition. Every Friday, the neighboring ranchers gathered at one spread or another for cards and conversation. What had started as a mutual defense alliance had grown into genuine community. That evening, as the men played cards and shared stories, Clara prepared supper with the help of Mary Peterson and Jane Miller. The women had become true friends through the trials of winter, and Clara treasured their easy companionship. "Luke seems settled," Mary observed, glancing through the window at the men around the table. "He is," Clara confirmed. "We both are. After everything you went through." Jane shook her head. "Most women would have sold and run after the first threat. This is my home," Clara said simply. "Our home, worth fighting for." Later. After the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Clara and Luke sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The night was mild, carrying the scent of sage and new grass. "I've been thinking," Luke said carefully, "about the future." "Oh?" "The horse training is going well. With the army post at Fort Laramie always needing remounts, we could expand, maybe hire some hands, build up the operation." Clara smiled. "From drifter to empire builder? Nothing that grand, just planning, setting down roots." He paused. "Maybe starting a family." The words hung in the soft evening air. Clara had been thinking the same but hadn't known how to broach the subject. The loss of his first family still shadowed Luke sometimes. She could see it in unguarded moments. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Thomas and I wanted children. It just never happened." "Doesn't mean it won't now," Luke said, taking her hand. "Different story, different chances." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, dreams intertwining like their fingers. Inside the house, a new photograph sat on the mantel, their wedding portrait. Thomas's picture remained too, moved respectfully to the bedroom. The past honored but no longer dominant. "You know what I realized today?" Clara asked. "I haven't thought about leaving in months. All winter. Some part of me was always ready to give up. To admit everyone was right about a woman not being able to handle this life. But somewhere along the way, I stopped doubting." "When?" She considered. "I think it was that night in the barn, during the second storm, when you said all of us belong to you. I'd been so focused on holding onto the land alone, I'd forgotten that strength can come from letting others in." "Took me a while to remember that too," Luke admitted. "Easier to drift than to risk caring again, but you made me brave enough to try." A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The sound that had once seemed threatening now felt like part of the landscape's music. This land that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving had become sanctuary. "I love you," Clara said, the words still new enough to send warmth through her chest. "And I love you," Luke replied, "more than I thought I could love anything again." They rose together, moving inside to bank the fire and secure the house for the night. These simple domestic rituals had become precious, shared tasks that spoke of permanence and partnership. As Clara prepared for bed, she paused at the window, looking out at the moonlit ranch. The new barn stood strong against the sky. The horses drowsed peacefully in the corral. The garden plot she'd started showed the first green shoots of vegetables. Everything spoke of life continuing, thriving, growing. "Coming to bed," Luke called softly. "In a moment." She thought of that desperate night months ago when a stranger had knocked on her door seeking shelter. How frightened she'd been. How alone. Now that stranger was her husband, her partner, her love. The Wyoming wilderness was still hard, still demanding, but it no longer felt like enemy territory. The challenges would continue: weather, markets, the everyday struggles of ranch life. But she'd face them with Luke beside her, with the neighbors who'd become family, with the knowledge that she'd already survived the worst and emerged stronger. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, to Thomas's memory, to whatever fate had sent Luke to her door. Then she turned from the window and went to join her husband, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The Wild West remained wild, but in the midst of that wildness, two hearts had found home. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the wind sang through the grass, and the land breathed with the eternal rhythm of endings becoming beginnings. And in a ranch house in Wyoming, a light burned steady against the darkness, not the desperate light of a woman alone anymore, but the warm glow of lives intertwined, of love renewed, of hope restored. The wilderness would always test them, but together, they were more than equal to its challenges. Together, they were home. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and courage in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from, whether you're driving through the mountains, sitting by your own fire, or perhaps somewhere unexpected. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of the American frontier, and share your thoughts about Clara and Luke's journey in the comments below. Until next time, partners.